back again with another episode of The Black Present. I'm here with my big brother, Nehez Meniooh. Ujai Sin, how are you?
Ujai Sin, I'm good. It's a pleasure to be on The Black Present. It's a pleasure to be back in Chicago, even though it's so cold right now. I'm reminded of why I wanted to get away from this place, but it's a pleasure to see you and the family and all of the family here, the EC family here.
Yeah, it's always good to see you too, and I appreciate you making the sacrifice to come visit this Arctic tundra when you're living in sunny Africa right now, Burkina Faso.
Yeah, and in Burkina Faso when I left, it was the cold season, and it was 2 days before I left, it was 100 degrees Fahrenheit, so that's what I left for this.
Right.
For this.
I know some people will be like 100 degrees in cold season. I better stay away from that place.
Maybe.
It's all a matter of perspective, but I would definitely take 100 degrees over 10.
It's a matter of perspective, but it's also a matter of what the body likes. So
yeah.
The body doesn't die in 100 degree.
Right, absolutely. If it wasn't for this heat and fossil fuel extraction planet-wide, we wouldn't be warm enough to be sitting here right now thinking about making a video, that's for sure.
Exactly.
But yeah, so The Black Present, as want to share, make sure all the viewers know, it's about, the fact that Black history isn't just history, that we have a present Black civilization to be proud of, and not just a Black civilization that of a diaspora of people whose slave descendants, but actually a present Black civilization that's from Africa, that's really at the root of all human civilization, and it's something to be proud of. It's something to be for us to seek, to connect with, and something for us to value. And I really want to highlight the great things that we are doing now, not to let it always be 50, 100 years later where we acknowledge great things happening. And I think one of the great things happening now is the movement for repatriation back to Africa. People here, descendants of enslaved people who didn't come over here by choice, now seeing that it's better for them to go back to where their ancestors came from instead of staying here in the land of captivity, basically. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit, because you've been there for about a year now, right? Or a little over?
A little over a year.
And just wanted to ask you a little bit about first your motivation for wanting to go.
Okay. Well, that's powerful. That's a powerful concept about the Black present. It is very true. And I think to sum up my motivation, you really said it. When we're educated over here in America, we learn at a certain age that we are descendants of people that were enslaved and brought here by force. And for me, ever since I was young, regardless of any dreams that I could have of success in whatever field I chose or I was exposed to or hypnotized by or excited about, regardless of any success in those fields, it always was more important to me to at least find out, well, what's this place we were taken from? Because if we were taken from somewhere and it was against my ancestors' will, and then we were taken to a place that we were only known as a slave, and even that, to give a person an identity of a slave versus a person being enslaved, that it was a while before I even realized how deep that was, to have slavery be your identity. And people in the West, blacks in the West, that's really become our identity. And the first step for me in really trying to lead any kind of successful life was to lift that off of myself, lift that off of my line. And the first step of doing that is, if I was brought over here and became a slave And the language that I speak here is the same language that was forced on my ancestors when they were enslaved. The religions I see here is the same ones that were forced on my ancestors when they were enslaved. The lifestyle, even the luxuries, even the privileges, even the things that are, you know, associated with the first world that other people in the world are wishing they had. If all of those things came with slavery, then I want to know what I had before. I'm not really interested in keeping those things or growing those things. It's better for me to find out how could I live like they would have wanted me to before they were captured and put on that boat. Mm-hmm. So from a young age, that really was, it was just important to me to investigate that. And when you're young and you're kind of a lot more naive about how far reaching the system is, how much of yourself has been influenced by that process, you know, it wasn't very real. But the spirit to seek out Africa was there. The spirit to seek out the black presence, the black civilization was there. Mm-hmm. And then when I had the opportunity to study under Nebnabala Musa Moradinibik, and then really see how far-reaching it is, how far-reaching the process of enslavement and colonization goes into our minds, into, you know, the way we see the world, our perspectives. Then it was just like, okay, how can I learn the perspective that my ancestors had and return to it? Mm-hmm. So I made that move a year and a half ago. However, before then I had been going and coming to the motherland from 2006. Mm-hmm. And I had been studying that lifestyle, you know, went through initiation, studying the culture, studying language from 2002 really, but went through initiation in 2004. Mm-hmm. So all of that was a big part of that process of just trying to dignify my ancestors again. Because if something happened to my ancestors and shame was put on them, and then instead of going and cleaning that shame off of them, the path that I was put on by them being shamed, I didn't even feel like I could find success on that path. Mm-hmm. If I went forward on there, no matter if people thought of me as successful, it would always be like something pulling on me, draining me. Wow. to walk that path. So that was kind of, you know, my perspective and what led me back to West Africa.
Wow, and that's, you know, it must have been something really pulling you. The ancestors must have really been, you know, guiding you on that journey, because, you know, it's hard, you know, to find people who really have that kind of just on their own kind of perspective and trying to really seek our origins instead of the hypnosis. Well, you mentioned a couple things, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about. You were talking about the technology, the luxuries, the conveniences, things of that nature that you said, you know, it's not really as valuable to you. And, well, one thing I see when people are trying to promote Africa is that you'll see these pictures of like modern cities in Africa. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, this is Africa, you know, wow, I didn't know Africa had cities, skyscrapers, and all this. And that becomes kind of a selling point, you know, something to take pride in. Mm-hmm. And somehow when people are talking about now going back, it's kind of going back saying like, you know, okay, we want some of, it's almost like going back to Africa, but living in Africa, trying to have a lifestyle more like what we have here. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to, you know, just ask you a little bit about your perspective on that, because you were saying that not only are you just going back there, but you've been studying the culture, studying the language, you know, knowing you personally since 2004, I think. We know you've been studying the history and putting a lot of a lot of effort into really embodying the culture. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you see the difference there and the approach to going back home.
Well, you know, the world is full of every type of person, and black civilization or Africa is full of every type of person, and the diaspora is full of all types of people with every type of interest. But the truth of the matter is that, you know, on the continent you have two cultures kind of there side by side. Meaning, of course, there's many cultures, you know, of course there's many countries in Africa, we all clear on that. But within every country you have two cultures there. You have the village culture, the culture of people that have maintained their ancestral traditions, the way their ancestors lived, the way their ancestors ate, the way their ancestors, you know, interacted with the spiritual world. They've maintained it. And then you have the city life, colonial Africa, the ones that have been influenced by the West. I think I had a kind of a unique perspective, but I'm sure other people hold similar perspectives. Part of it was a unique perspective that I had from a young age that I can really associate with just the heaviness that was on me. Mm-hmm. To hear that my ancestors were enslaved, to see in present day society at that time my people that looked like me, people in the family, people in the community were being locked up. You know, that was right when 3 Strikes came out. You know, you could see the prison state that we lived in. You could see the unbalanced treatment by the justice system. Mm-hmm. You could see the history of how we've been treated on this side. So ideas of success, ideas of just getting rich in a place like that where there was so much suffering of people that came from the same place as me, the same history as me, I was never really interested in that. Mm-hmm. But then a big influence was through my initiation and kind of having gaining profound understanding about the system of colonization and colonial education and you know, conditioning, colonial conditioning, all of that then just kind of clarified to me that I didn't want to return to my ancestral homeland, as Master Naba put it, as a ambassador of colonization. Mm-hmm. If my ancestors were enslaved and taken somewhere and they were re-educated, I don't want to go back there like championing that education and then bringing that education and that perspective and that lifestyle to impose it on the very place I was supposed to be going back to return to like not just return my body to, but return the blood that had been taken away. Mm-hmm. So for me, that was really my perspective. But the truth of the matter is, you know, Africa is full of many types of people with many different perspectives. Mm-hmm. Maybe, you know, there are people there that don't have that heaviness, or at least know how not to face it. For me, I couldn't escape it when I was young. Mm-hmm. So even within the traditional culture of Africa and the elders in the villages and the elders in tradition, they also saw that what we're seeing now with globalization and colonial influence, it was inevitable. They saw that it was inevitable at a certain time, and therefore, you know, they also sent their children to be educated. And a lot of people who came from traditional parents were even being educated in the city, even being influenced by colonial religions, mm-hmm. and even not having a good understanding of how deep their parents were in the tradition. Mm-hmm. So the two worlds exist. And a lot of people from here are more interested in the colonial world over there and the modern cities and the modern technology that exists over there. And it's surprising to them just because we all victims of propaganda over here. So what we see of Africa for what we saw of Africa for a long time was just, you know, hungry people, people with disease, and, you know, all of the propaganda that we all know. So to find out that there's places over there that are not too much different than New York, that are not too much different than LA, that excites people. And maybe that can be, you know, at least a way that the blood can be pulled back home. Everybody is different. But for me, those words that came from my master just resonated very much and rang very loudly in my head. That he said that the elders have been waiting a long time for people that were taken away in slavery to return. But they didn't want to see them come back like ambassadors for their enslavers. So that's what was important to me, and I wanted to make sure that when I went back, I was going back as a student, as a child that's coming back home to learn and to find his place at home, rather than thinking that I'm going back thinking that I'm bringing something beneficial from here, when this has just been horror and torture for us over here, you know. So that's really what my perspective was. But, you know, I can see and understand why, for people that didn't take that route through kind of reconditioning themselves in the paradigm and perspective of their ancestors, why going and at least finding something familiar would be more inviting to them.
Okay, yeah. It really. Man, I had something I was gonna say. Good thing I could edit videos. Yeah. But. Talking about going back. Oh, you already made the point. That's why I still forget. Okay, so yeah. So can you you know, now that you've been over there and you've had your experience being over there and trying to reconnect, can you share something about your experience? Something about what it's been like for you trying to reintegrate yourself with your roots.
Sure. But my experience was a little different, because for a few reasons. One is that, as we've already mentioned, I was initiated and therefore kind of started to go home intellectually, spiritually, and in my perspective, even before I moved there. So that already is very different. I was going and coming for years before I moved there.
Right.
That already is very different. But what's also very different is that I went to a French-speaking country, and I don't speak French. French or French Creole, the Louisiana version, was even my grandfather's first language, but I myself don't speak French. So that is probably, I would say, the biggest challenge in going and really being able to reintegrate, or really, you know, reintegrate into the larger community. But because I already I went through initiation, I already was going and coming. When I went into a community that I already was a part of, that I already was I already was integrated into. Everybody knew me already. And that community, being in the traditions, it therefore connects and touches on other traditional communities.
Right.
So for that, in that respect, it wasn't difficult at all. But now, as I'm learning more and more French, even my children speak French better than me now because they picked it up a lot quicker. That process is still happening, and that's the process that's kind of a little slower. But it doesn't even really affect me much because I have a community that I already exist, work, function, and live within. So.
Okay. Let's see. And what's some maybe interesting things or Yeah, some things you think our viewers would want to know about about the culture there. Like you're saying that really the culture is what we want to return to, not there just because of the land, but because of our culture and how our people function traditionally. What are some major differences that you've learned having been over there? And maybe you can give some perspective on why you would prefer that to what we have here in the United States.
I can try. Everything is different. I will say everything is different, meaning that I even live with my family in the city. But what I mean by everything is different is that even city life there, the rhythm in which it moves is very different. Here in Chicago, we have most of the city is concrete. We have parks where we can go when we want to leave the concrete. We hear sirens all of the time. We hear gunshots. We hear ambulances. It's very much city life. A lot of light pollution. Where there, most of the roads are dirt roads. The main roads are concrete. And at any given time, whether on a dirt road or a concrete road, you can see a herd of cows pass you. You can see animals living all around you. You can see children kind of out by themselves in large numbers at a young age. So life itself kind of moves at a slower pace that's closer to nature's pace, even in the city. And that really does a lot for kind of the level of stress that we get used to living in here in the West. Even I know for my wife, that was one of the big things she appreciated when we first went over there. After a few months, she just noticed like how more relaxed she could be. So that's different. But the thing that I would say I most value is that it's a place of culture. And what I can give maybe for some viewers to relate who haven't been there is that how if you have elders or family that live in the South, at least a little while ago, if you go to the South, there are rules that elders have. You don't sweep on somebody's feet, you don't do this, you don't do that, you make sure, all kinds of rules like that, like what to do and what not to do. And traditional Africa is like that times 1,000, because you have an understanding of energy, an understanding of the spiritual field, an understanding of even just social dynamics of what's proper to do for harmony of the family, harmony of the society, harmony of ethnic groups living with other ethnic groups. And therefore there are rules, and those rules are tied to history, and that history is tied to identities. And all of that a child is learning as they're growing up, and they're having to live according to those rules. And that itself is like another aspect of just being human that we losing on this side of the world, because now the rules we know are just what's going to get me in trouble with the police or not. What's going to get me in trouble where I have to pay a fine or lose out on a job or not. But there's no rules that are really tied to your identity in your family, your identity in your ethnic group, your identity, as a human being. It's more like the systems you're a part of and the systems that dominate you. The Chicago Police Department doesn't like it when I do this. My boss at work doesn't like it when I do that. We don't know what our ancestors don't like anymore. I don't eat this because my ancestors said nobody in the family should eat that anymore. I never can talk bad about those people because my ancestors made a pact with those people. We don't even know that kind of living anymore. So all of that has a profound effect on youth especially, and I find it very beneficial just because I get to see my children grow up in something like that, where they have that side of human education that I didn't really have, that even I yearned for, because when I was having that heaviness and I wanted to find out, okay, well, let me go looking for what my ancestors did. All I could find in this side of the world is how did my ancestors deal with this subjugation? And then you led to civil rights movement, and you led to resistance movements, and you led to social movements, but nothing that really touches on our ancestral identity.
Right.
So to have my children be able to grow up in a place where just the social dynamics, your ancestral identity, and what they learned and what they advised and what they forbid their children for doing, all of it is wrapped up in that social fabric, and the ways that men and women and elders and youth interact with each other. So that's the most profound thing to me. That's really our culture, our identity. And that's what I mean, like here, our culture is just based around how we survived the system that was slaughtering our ancestors. And now it's like we're surviving by making as much money as we can, and any money that we make it more money, but it's not about reclaiming whatever our ancestors were doing. So that's the biggest thing for me, the biggest difference that has a profound effect on me, and that I'm very appreciative of the profound effect I see it having on my children.
Yeah, that reminds me, we were talking the other day about repatriation and about the, if the government is serious about repairing a people or repairing the damage that's done, maybe some of the steps they would take. Nowadays, the repatriation conversation is about, just monetary, I call it compensation, the same way that you get compensation when you have a lawsuit, an injury lawsuit or something like that, but that's different from repairing something. I wanted to ask you, a little bit about your perspective on reparations and how, even like what you're doing, reclaiming your culture, going back home, how you see that as, maybe an answer for reparations.
Okay. That's a very good question, but the answer is a very good question, but it's a deep question, because even to talk about reparations, we have to kind of take a step back and see just how well trained we are on this side of the planet. So just like what I was just talking about, like even some aspects of education in learning what it means to be human. Every human has a father and a mother. Every human has grandparents. Every human has predecessors that therefore had ways of living, wisdom that they got from that way of living, and they could pass it down to their children. Who else would you pass it to? That's just what it means to be human. We're losing that more and more in the West. In the West, I always tell people I lecture to, or my students or initiates, that in the West, they really succeeded in making life for us so small. So that what we see of this life that meant so many different things in that line of predecessors that we have, that line of forefathers, foremothers that we have, it meant so many different things. Now it just means some very basic things for us. Money, pleasure, material, technology,
fame, reputation.
And all of it is just based on what you can touch, what you can feel. It doesn't really go beyond that. Even the sectors in society that are supposed to go beyond that, like religion, what we call spirituality, in the West, they don't go beyond that. Because if I just now think I'm going to call on something invisible just to wish for the money and the fame, then it didn't go beyond that. So that's the first thing. So if my world is made small and it's just about what I can see and what I can spend and what I can earn, then reparations has a place. Because I already am disregarding that line of ancestors, and I'm just facing life for what I can grab and what I can touch, what I can feel. But if I see that life is bigger than this, then the fact that the people that sacrificed, gave me life, passed life down to me, even went through a suffering I can't even imagine. Generations of being enslaved. I can't even imagine that. And before that, it was torture, just the process of coming over on the boat, being locked in a slave pen over there, not knowing what's happening to you next. All of that inside of me was passed down to me. And now you're going to equate that to, well, if you pay me, we'll wipe it clean.
We can forget about it.
We can forget about it because you owe me money.
Right.
But even that is so kind of a simple way of thinking, because that money with the faces of the people important in this nation that enslaved me is only valuable because you killed all of my ancestors, because you forced all of my ancestors to work for you. That's the only reason that paper and that ink has any value to anybody in the world, because of the blood that my ancestors shed for you to get rich. And now you want me to say, okay, they shed all of that blood, as long as I can get a piece, we'll act like it didn't happen. That to me is like, it's so shameful, it's almost sickening. But it's understandable when the world is like this. It's understandable when the ancestral traditions have been taken out, so you're no longer living to perpetuate the life of your ancestors, to pass to be a link between your ancestors and your descendants. When all of that is taken out, then it's like, why not? Why wouldn't I get as much as I can? But what we were talking about the other day is that if we take in a wider perspective, if at one point my line, my family was taken away from a place, you forced us to come over here, we worked for you, we made this place rich. If you want to try to repair it, the very least you can do is offer me a freeway back and forth. I took you from there. You want to go back? I'll take you back. But if you ever want to come here, the door is always open. You're the ones that built this place. That's the first, like, okay, I'm really interested in showing you that I see I made a mistake.
Right.
If it's just like, you know what, we made so much money now, let's talk about just giving you some to shut you up. So I don't have to listen to you crying about how I owe you this, I owe you that, this belongs to you. If I give you some, you'll shut up, right? You see, that's a big difference. That's like just a business move. Any wise business person gonna say, hey, this been like a boil on my elbow since these people got out of slavery. So exactly. Why not just push them some money and shut them up, and then they can't say anything because we squared it. That's just a strategic business move. But if you say, you know what, I made a mistake, I took you away from your place, I'm gonna give you a free way to go back there to build your place like you came and built mine, but to thank you for what you did here and to, you know, wish that you will find it to forgive me, you can come back whenever you want. That's basic. I mean, that's just like just another perspective that if this was serious about repairing something, then it would be more along those lines, not about why don't you benefit from how much I benefited from torturing and, you know, enslaving your ancestors. You can benefit too.
Hmm. Yeah, that's deep. And mentioning just the whole process of the torture, of the captivity, the process of being brought over here, how many people didn't even make it. Large percentages of people didn't even make it, and then those who did had to suffer under unbearable conditions, and some for hundreds of years, or generations, being stripped of your language, your culture, your values, your family, and then all of that. It's like it's almost like how they do the they used to whip people. All the scars of the whips on the back, that's never going away. There's no way to repair that and bring it back to what it was. But at least if we're talking about repairing something, it's talking about going back, trying to at least restore it to as close to its original state as possible. And I have no idea how giving some money is going to facilitate that, unless the person already has a perspective that I'm going to take this money and build something for myself in my home. But that that's not coming from.
Well, the thing is, you didn't educate those people to have that.
Exactly.
And at this time, before the Earth Center, at this time, you're the one controlling the education. You're the one that dictated what perspective, what ideas, what paradigm those people are functioning under. So that's not the case. That won't. That's why I'm saying this is a strategic business move.
Right.
These people are our biggest consumers. If I give them money, I just now increase my economy. I just benefit my system. The deeper part is that education piece, because we have to understand it's such a I don't know what other word to use besides con, but it's such kind of a strategic business move to make for America. It almost makes me wonder if they're only letting it go as a debate just to make us really want it. Because it's just a smart thing for them to do. Because the thing we need to understand is that groups that have been awarded or afforded reparations in the past, like the Japanese were given reparations for what happened to them here, Jews were given reparations. Those people had a cultural identity. Their cultural identity wasn't kind of beaten and miseducated out of them. So therefore, when you give them money, they have a culture to take it back to and systems to put it in so that it builds up their nation. But when you have a group of people here that are just function like individual consumers of your system, then giving them money is just feeding your system. It's not even going to repairing their nation, because you already educated them to not think of themselves as belonging to where they come from and being connected to them, and therefore having something to build. What they're really building only exists under you, and therefore as they build it up, yours rises above it. So that's the thing too that I think we really miss, and it's almost as if I talk just straight and openly, it's almost as if it's done so well that even for us to feel connected to the cultures we come from, it's almost like it's a loss or a lack of pride for African Americans, because there's this dynamic between Africans and African Americans now, where it's like Africans don't like us, Africans think they're better than us, and therefore like we distance ourselves from them, and we really therefore like grab tightly to whatever identity that's been left for us here, because understand that's not a normal culture. You've had other people around the planet always will go in subjugation. Sometimes they will be defeated, they will be conquered, but then they still reach for their identity back before that conquering process, back before they were conquered. But if now your identity is just about what you've done in dealing with being conquered, and you yourself want to kind of chop it at a certain point between what was happening to you before that, then you see whatever you're going to be building is just who you are and where you fit in that conquered nation. I mean, in that nation that conquered you.
Right.
You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah. And it's like nowadays we have this ADOS, African Descendants of Slavery, kind of like a political designation for a group of people. And to say like these are the people who need to be awarded the reparations when it's awarded, and not, people of color from other places. And, to say that is one thing, but then it kind of gets into something else, because I see a lot of other things, coming out of people in that movement. Like, I've seen this one lady go so far as, I think the lady who played Harriet Tubman was continental African. Like that's a problem, because she's not that money for that role that she's playing, the money that she's being paid is not going to African descendants. It's like, things just like that. The division, it's adding fuel to the division that already was bad in the first place.
That's what I mean. It's just divide and conquer. We find ourselves, when you give the education to your colonizer, your education and the education of your children, when you give the rights to your colonizer, then you will always find yourself fighting the very battles that push you deeper into it. So that's what it is. It's just divide and conquer. And we feel proud. That's what I'm saying. We feel proud to kind of disconnect ourselves and isolate ourselves.
Right.
But in any kind of conflict, in any kind of warfare, isolation is what's going to... That's how you lose.
Right, exactly.
So, you can't expect anything but loss if you isolate yourself. Numbers is what helps you win.
Right.
So the thing is that if you even will have United States of America talk about reparations and wanting to repair what they did to Africans in bringing them over here, and then you want to allow them to talk about, well, what about all of those that were brought on the same ships that went to the Caribbean, all of those, because a lot of the Africans that were enslaved in America came through the Caribbean. And then what about all of those that were then influenced and colonized in Liberia, that this nation went over there and did? There's all of these aspects. So then African descendants here in the United States to isolate themselves and then say, no, it's just us that deserve the money. Like, we don't see how much more pitiful that is. It's like, hey, no, just pay me for the suffering you caused my ancestors. I don't want it to touch my brothers and sisters. Like, that's what I mean.
Like it'll be spread out too much.
Yeah, maybe I will get less.
It won't
don't
be
let that happen. That's just, it's just shameful. It just shows how well we've been trained, like I said at the beginning.
And speaking of education, I wanted to make sure that we don't finish this interview without acknowledging, where both of our spiritual master that you mentioned before, Nebnabala Musa.
I wasn't gonna let us finish. I said it earlier.
and the movement that he started with the Earth Center to really like build a mission for us to have some way of reconnecting ourselves, within ourselves first, not just bringing our bodies to Africa, but within ourselves, our spirits, reconnecting ourselves to our source of knowledge, our source of wisdom, our source of guidance to how to function in the world, that really allows us a different perspective that's coming, from where our ancestors coming from, like you said, coming from that identity that pre-existed our ancestors' enslavement and our enslavement. So most gratitude to him and to those upright, upstanding people who, you know, have worked and are continuing to work to support our traditions despite everything that's been done and still being done to try to subjugate humanity and destroy what we all come from.
I mean, most definitely. That's,
yeah.
you know, always, as one of his disciples, I try to just make sure that I'm leading a life that's showing my gratitude for what he did.
Mm-hmm.
Because you really, when you are a product of a system of enslavement, when you're a product of a system of colonization, you even, some would say, kind of like in the most concentrated part of it in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And you educated in it, you don't have, I know, you know, this might seem kind of deflating for people to hear, but we just don't have what it takes to see outside of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because a human being is just their exposure.
Mm-hmm.
That's so much, I mean, that really dictates how we see the world. And if our exposure is just English language, and if our exposure is just Western education, then it's going to be hard to see outside of that and what that has told you to be. Mm-hmm. The position that has given you. Mm-hmm. So to have somebody come from another place to kind of start to shed a different perspective, and even that perspective is touching on something that lives inside of you in the blood, because it was the perspective that your ancestors were seeing things in before that system took you away, is very, very, you know, profound, and it's just so huge. But I know it's unique because you needed an outside perspective. Mm-hmm. From people within the system. The perspective won't be different enough in the crucial points to where you're really going to see beyond the box that you've been put in. Mm-hmm. So that's why I say, even for those who are excited about Africa, because there's some pockets in Africa that look like the West, I can't be upset as long as it gets you there, and then at least to be exposed to something different. Uh-huh. It's at least a step.
Yes.
It's at least a step. So that's why I mean, like, there's many people in Africa, there's many people in the world. Not every person is going to have the perspective that comes from sitting and learning from somebody that grew up in a village. Money didn't mean anything to people in his village. They didn't have TV. They didn't, you know, they don't know the world we know. Uh-huh. And therefore, that difference of perspective changed us profoundly. Absolutely. Other people having a step there to even now be in a society that has both types of people, both types of perspectives, that's already a big step. And then it's just about the humility to face life, to know that, okay, as I travel, there's so many more perspectives in the world than the one my nation or my colonizer gave me. So let me at least have the humility to listen with an open ear and an open mind to the way other people see the world, and then we grow, you know. Yeah. But definitely all the gratitude in the world to Master Naba.
Yeah, and you know, just to add on what you said, it's really difficult, you know, to even understand how much it's, I don't know how to say other than impossible to see outside of the box without getting a perspective from outside. You know, and you won't even know until you actually get that perspective. And you know, the way that we've been conditioned here to think, oh, our way is the best. We know what freedom is supposed to look like. We know what, you know, right and wrong is supposed to look like. We know what justice and equality and all this, you know, these ideological terms that we like to throw around. At the end of the day, it's just what's been put in our minds by our educators, and so to have the humility to go and try to see a different perspective is crucial. And there's so many out here. I was just at an event yesterday about the Kurds in the Middle East, and they're now like after having been under domination from, you know, kind of like their group has been, their whole nationhood was taken away, and they've been split into different other Arab countries, or middle, I don't know what to call them. I don't know if Turkey's considered Arab, but a lot of them are in Turkey, Syria, Iran, and Iraq, and they don't have representation in the UN and so on, but they still struggling to maintain their identity and fight for their independence and sovereignty. And you know, it's movements like this all over the world of people trying to hold on to what they come from, and we steadily over here just running from it and trying to hold on to, you know, some pride that we want to have some pride in what we think we are, but we don't even know it. You know, I don't want to go too far on that. I just wanted to probably wrap up just to ask if you had any, you know, I mean, words of inspiration. What you said has been inspiring, but if you wanted to, I guess, say something to encourage people to want to take a path or follow in the path that you took. You know, other people are watching you doing something that's kind of breaking ground, and you're a pioneer in ways of in the way you're going about it. Not many people have taken that kind of a step, you know, with your whole family and everything. What kind of advice or encouragement would you give to people who are looking at you and trying to see your example?
Well, I don't know about the whole pioneer bit, but
because they're a pioneer.
Well, sure, maybe for the community, but there are people that have done it, and there are people that have moved their family back, and you know, they might be at different places in their perspective or in their kind of decolonization, but either way, they brought their blood back home.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's commendable.
And people have been doing it, and I don't want to take away from that.
Right, for a long time, for generations.
Yeah, generations.
So I just want to make that point. But what I would say is, I will repeat something that one of my elders said to us. It was a group of us. Mm-hmm. And he said that if you're not living for your ancestors, kind of to right the wrongs that were done to them, to clean the insults that were thrown on them, to perpetuate what they were living for, to attain what they couldn't attain, that they were after. If you're not living for your ancestors and you're not living for your descendants, to make sure that you doing things to put them in a better place, to make sure you're doing things to allow them, even in our current situation, to live further away from the enslavement that we were born into. Mm-hmm. If you're not living for your ancestors or your descendants, what are you living for? Mm. And I always remember those words that elder said, because it's true. And then you compare that to life being made this small for us, where it's just like you only live once, don't have children because, you know, they're just going to get in the way. The idea of life that we live over here, mm-hmm. really, for our ancestors, that it's not life. Mm-hmm. Because the human life is what, at most 100 years? Mm-hmm. At least in the West.
In the West.
100 years.
It's getting less and less.
And then that's if we extremely lucky.
Right.
We in Chicago, it's maybe 18 years, 20 years, 21 years. And then we're going to use that just on ourselves, what we can feel, what we can be happy with. And we see that what feels good to us today don't feel good to us tomorrow. What makes us happy today don't make us happy tomorrow. And that's what this whole life that we have is supposed to be about. Mm-hmm. So I would just tell people, because I know, you know, what makes us comfortable and what makes us scared is based on what we're familiar with. Mm-hmm. What you're unfamiliar with, you're afraid of. Mm-hmm. Whether you call it fear or something else, You know, whether your pride want to call it something else, no problem. But that's really what makes us scared. But if you consider that, you have to use this life either benefiting those that came before you or benefiting those that came after you. And therefore, if you're going to bring them benefit, you're going to have to face those fears. If you're going to bring pride to your ancestors or make sure that your children can live with dignity, you're going to have to go into unfamiliar territory. And every time you go into unfamiliar territory, if you don't think beyond yourself, then really the way our ancestors see it, the way our ancestral culture sees it, it's just like it's a waste of your life. Nowadays, we really, when we talk about facing fears, that's what I mean. It's like for reaching colonial goals and making money. But that's just a very small part of life. That's not the life that even continues. Even if you check the tax laws and things like that, you'll see how much of that life even you get to pass your children. They take a lot of that. They take a large percentage of whatever you use your life to get. So it's better you use your life to accumulate things they can't take, and they can't take from your children when you pass them down. So that's what I would just kind of offer your viewers to think about, and to really I don't want to say haunt them with, but I hope they don't forget that. Because I know myself, growing up in the United States, learning that my ancestors were enslaved, even when I was young, I worked with my grandmother to trace back, and I could even see when we became hash marks on the census cards, and when it was just people that were enslaved, you can't read their name anymore on the census cards. And when you in a place like that, you're born into a situation like that, you have to start to consider, how can I dignify them? How can I use this life to change that? I don't just want to continue on the road that set me on. How can I use this life to turn that around? So that's what I would just hope that your viewers think about. And no matter if, maybe whatever has them hesitating to look into their ancestral culture, to travel to their ancestral lands, let that reverberate in their mind and push them past those fears.
Powerful words. Well, we'll close on that note. Thank you all for viewing The Black Present. Again, my name is Kasabez Makama. For Nehez Meniooh, I'll say peace. Wishing you all blessings on your path, and may you get some inspiration from these words.
Thanks for having me, bro.
Thank you.